From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Mao, and I have the honor of serving as the Deputy Librarian of Congress, and it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the 2016 16th National Book Festival, and of course to the History and Biography stage, which is generously sponsored by Wells Fargo. We at the Library of Congress are extremely thrilled to be presenting the National Book Festival for the 16th time. This terrific event would not be possible without the friends that we have supporting us, generously supporting, like Wells Fargo, and we are very appreciative of that. But more important, we would not be here but for readers like all of you who support the authors, are interested in them, and really come out in droves, and so we're extremely excited. Thank you very much for being here today. Okay, thank you. This year's festival is inspired by journeys and the idea that a book is a voyage unto itself, taking us to places that we might not be able to see in person, but we can visit by reading about it. And it gives us the opportunity to better understand our world, and in particular why we're here today celebrating histories and biographies. So reading to us is an ideal form of travel, and it's really the best way for us to develop and encourage and grow our minds. In addition to the author presentations that we have here on this stage for you today, we have lots of other events. I hope you will take the opportunity to visit the lower level of the convention center, where we have lots of family activities. We have booths for our sponsors, AARP, Wells Fargo. We also have the Library of Congress Pavilion, where I encourage you to visit us and learn more about your national library. Learn all about the wonderful things that we are doing at the Library of Congress to make our treasures available to you, whether you come and visit us in person or visit us online. So we have a great lineup. I don't want to take up too much time, and so I hope you will welcome our first presenter, who will kick things off for us, Mr. Carlos Lozada, who is the Associate Editor and nonfiction book critic for The Washington Post. I invite him to come up and introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much, and enjoy your day.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2016 National Book Festival. As David mentioned, my name is Carlos Lozada. I review nonfiction for The Washington Post, which is a charter sponsor of the festival. Thanks again to the Library of Congress, which has hosted the festival for 16 years, as well as festival co-chairman David Rubenstein, and the many sponsors that make the event possible. I've never met Sarah Vowell personally until right now. But maybe, like a lot of you, I feel like I've known her forever, whether through her work on This American Life, her delightful books into the side alleys of American history, and in the role that most excites my moody 6-year-old daughter as the voice and soul of Violet from The Incredibles. Sarah can basically do anything and make it seem effortless and funny and profound all at once. And if you've not read her obituaries of John Ritter and Tom Landry, you're missing out. But we're here to talk about her books. She's written a history of Hawaii, of the Puritans, of presidential assassination sites, and most recently, a book on America's revolutionary BFF, the Marquis de Lafayette, in her 2015 book, Lafayette in the Somewhat United States. There will be time for questions after Sarah speaks, and C-SPAN is covering the history and biography sessions, so be on your best behavior. Sarah will be signing books at 1:30, so please get one. It is my huge fanboy pleasure to introduce Sarah Vowell.
Hello, book lovers, people of C-SPAN. I realized recently that I travel around the country so much, and I only meet people who read books. And I don't know if you've watched the news like the last year or so, but I would like to say that I'm cool with that. Thank you. That I like my little vision of America that I get from meeting all of you. So I'm feeling very contemplative today. If you're watching this on television, we are here in Washington, D.C. And for me, I arrived in this city precisely half my life ago, 23 years ago. I'll wait for a second for you to do the math. I know that's not your strong suit, or mine. You have other nice qualities. So 23 years ago, I arrived in this city on the train from Montana. My parents drove me up to Shelby, Montana, where I caught the Amtrak. I took it across North Dakota. That took a while. Changed trains in Chicago, saw the buildings of Louis Sullivan, thought, I want to live here someday. I ended up doing that. Went across Pennsylvania. I remember the conductor, we were passing the Susquehanna River, and he said, get a load of this scenic wonderland. And I arrived here in DC for my Smithsonian internship. And I think it was the next day, Yasser Arafat shook Rabin's hand on the White House lawn. It was a hopeful time in America. The Library of Congress is sponsoring this event. You know, when I was an intern at the Smithsonian, the first works that I worked on that had the ISBN number, the Library of Congress catalog number, were finding aids to things like art in Philadelphia, and the Archives of American Art, or, yeah, that was the main one, Italian American Art History. So I was saying earlier that for me as an author, every time I get one of my books, when it comes in the mail the first time, the first thing I do is look at that catalog number, because as we all know, life is short and the Library of Congress is forever. So take that, Great Britain. But anyway, being here, you know, thinking about when I was, you know, a young pup leaving home to come here, I realized that is the story that I've been writing all these years through 7 books. It's always the story of the misfit leaving home. And that is the story of our country. I think earlier this year in this city, T-Bone Burnett said, "This is the story of the United States. A kid walks away from home with a song and nothing else and conquers the world." So for me, that is always the story I'm writing, whether it's Theodore Roosevelt leaving New York City to mourn his wife and mother and head out to North Dakota to be a cowman. And, you know, as one of his biographers said, he was the only president who ever read Anna Karenina while on a 3-day search for cattle thieves. Or our friend Abraham Lincoln, who, when he left Springfield to come here as president and took the train to Philadelphia to Independence Hall, and he said that the political sentiments I entertain have been drawn from the sentiments which were given to the world from this hall. And he said that the goal of his presidency was to save the country invented there, and he added ominously, "I would rather be assassinated on this spot than surrender it." Obviously, the person who did assassinate him is another misfit who left home, from Baltimore, you know. And then I've written about, you know, New England missionaries who come to Hawaii, like so many churchy folk of the early 19th century who saw the new maps from expeditions like that of Captain Cook's and resolved to spread the gospel to all the places where Cook's sailors had spread the clap. Or to their forebears, the New England Puritans, such as the Massachusetts Bay colonists, who, unlike those hippies from Plymouth, were trying to convince the English government that they were not separating from English and that they were going to America where they would remain as English as beheadings and clotted cream, and even wrote a letter to Charles I in 1630 called A Humble Request, in which they said, they just wanted to remind the king that we shall be in our poor cottages in the wilderness, whereas in private, John Winthrop, their leader, would tell them, the opposite. We shall be as a city upon a hill. So, misfits leaving home. My latest misfit leaving home is a French teenager, the Marquis de Lafayette, and this book tells the story of him leaving home and his pregnant teenage wife to come to America to throw in with George Washington's Continental Army. And so I'll read for a bit and then I'll take questions, and I wanted to read this section of when of his voyage to America and his early time, and then I'll read a little tangent about a heroic bookseller to pander to the subject of the proceedings. So at 1777, Lafayette has absconded to America. He's bought his own ship to come here. The King of France is trying to keep him at home. His wife's family is trying to keep him at home because, as I mentioned, she is pregnant. And once he makes it onto this ship he has purchased across the Atlantic, he starts sending his wife, he starts writing his wife, Adrienne, these letters to try to explain why he has abandoned her and their forthcoming child. I believe I say in the book that while history might be full of great fathers, recorded history is not where to find them. At sea, Lafayette unveiled the grandeur of his mission to his wife, Adrienne, and attempted to include her in it. He wrote, "I hope that as a favor to me, you will become a good American." She is a teenage French aristocrat from one of the most illustrious families in France. She lives in a mansion in Paris when she isn't living at their mansion in Versailles. So asking her to become a good American is sort of baffling. Also, he really wasn't in a position to ask her any favors. Nevertheless, he proclaimed to his wife, "The welfare of America is intimately bound up with the happiness of humanity. She is going to become the deserving and sure refuge of virtue, of honesty, of tolerance, of equality, and of a tranquil liberty." Now, to establish such a forthright dreamland of decency, who wouldn't sign up to shoot at a few thousand Englishmen just as long as Mr. Bean wasn't one of them? Alas, from my end of history, from our end of history, there's a big file cabinet blocking the view of the sweet-natured republic Lafayette foretold, and it is where the government keeps the folders full of Indian treaties, the Chinese Exclusion Act, and NSA-monitored electronic messages pertinent to national security, which is apparently all of them, including the one in which I asked my mom for advice on how to get a red Sharpie stain out of couch upholstery. Lafayette confided in his wife, "In coming as a friend to offer my services to this intriguing republic, I bring to it only my frankness and my goodwill, no ambition, no self-interest. In working for my glory, I work for their happiness." Disregarding the inherent contradictions of proclaiming his lack of ambition and self-interest in the same sentence, he revealed that attaining glory was one of his two stated goals. He was an only child. The phrase "coming as a friend" glows on the page because it turned out to be the truth. It's appropriate to ding Lafayette for the casual cruelty with which he abandoned his family, roll the eyes a bit at his retro quest for fame, or envy his outlandish optimism. But none of that negates the fact that he turned out to be the best friend America ever had. And I am not only referring to his youthful daring-do on battlefields up and down the eastern seaboard, I am also referring to any number of his dull, grown-up kindnesses later on, such as assisting Thomas Jefferson, the United States minister to France in the 1780s, in opening up French markets to American goods. Lafayette's lobbying procured Nantucket whalers the contract to supply the whale oil that lit the streetlights of Paris. Because of Lafayette, the City of Lights glowed by New England's boiled blubber. And to say thanks for getting them the gig, all Nantucket rallied its milk cows to send him a giant wheel of cheese. What's gratitude? What's so American? Let's send cheese to France. Okay. So finally, after his 2-month voyage on his ship, the Victory, which he called, floating on this dreary plain, they came ashore in Charleston around midnight on June 13th, 1777, waking up the household of Major Benjamin Huger of the South Carolina militia. And that's where they stayed. And Lafayette wrote later, "I retired to rest that night, rejoicing that I had at last attained the haven of my dreams." He went on to gush, "The next morning was beautiful. Everything around me was new to me. The room, the bed draped in delicate mosquito curtains, the black servants who came to me quietly to ask my commands, the strange new beauty of the landscape outside my windows, the luxuriant vegetation, all combined to produce a magical effect." In other words, it was a buggy swamp chock full of slaves, but Lafayette was in love. So he and his men, they start out in carriages and then end up on horses, and by the end they're basically like walking to Philadelphia, where he's going to what became Independence Hall, and to announce, "Here I am." And he expected a warm welcome. The moment, Lafayette recalled, was peculiarly unfavorable to strangers. I don't relate to that at all. The Americans were displeased with the pretensions and disgusted with the conduct of many Frenchmen. Consequently, he wrote, the Congress finally adopted the plan of not listening to any stranger. So when Lafayette and his friends called at the State House, then the moniker of Independence Hall, Congressman James Lovell of Massachusetts shooed them away, snarling, "It seems that French officers have a great fancy to enter our service without being invited." But most of them, including Lafayette, had been invited by American agents in France, hence the throngs of irksome Frenchmen who had been washing ashore for months, expecting to be welcomed with rank and riches. So also, I should mention at this moment, Europe is uncharacteristically at peace, and so all of these European officers, especially Frenchmen, come over in droves wanting a job. And Washington, who is always in need of men, wasn't excited about these particular men because he said they have no attachment nor ties to the country. And he bemoaned their ignorance of our language, and he pointed out that American officers would be disgusted if foreigners were put over their heads. And so that's exactly what happened right before Lafayette arrived. This other French guy, his name was Philippe Ducoudray, and he was a French veteran of the 7 Years' War, and he showed up in Philadelphia a month before Lafayette did, saying, "Here I am, I'm, a bigwig at," I'm paraphrasing, a bigwig at Louis the 16th's court, and I'm the greatest renowned authority on artillery in France. And what he was a wine merchant's son who had maybe seen a few cannons. And but he shows up and he says, I deserve to be your artillery chief. And so it turns out that replacing the Continental Army's beloved chief artillery officer, Henry Knox, was not as easy and arbitrary as Bewitched casting a second Darren, because Henry Knox was the revolution. Born in Boston in 1759 to Irish immigrants, Knox dropped out of school to support his mother and siblings after his father's death, apprenticing at a bookbinder, and he eventually opened his own bookstore, the London Bookstore. And after the Coercive Acts of 1774, this was really hard on pretty much all the colonists, but especially its merchants, and especially Knox as a bookseller. They had closed the port, and he couldn't get any of the books he was selling from England, and the colonists were boycotting stuff from England anyway, so those acts, the Intolerable Acts, they were supposed to serve as a warning to all the other colonies and meant to slap Massachusetts into submission. But what happened was it further radicalized an already radical Massachusetts and rallied the other colonies to come to its material and political aid. So Henry Knox, meanwhile, he had wooed the royal governor's daughter, Lucy Flucker, great name, and he had joined a local militia, the Boston Grenadiers, and then shots were fired in Lexington and Concord in 1775. So Knox leaves his failing bookstore in the hands of his brother, throws in with the militias. Then when Washington is appointed the new commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, and he shows up, and he's telling the soldiers we should have no more sectional rivalries, we're all one country, when privately, he's writing to his crony back in Virginia, these people are stupid, especially the Massachusetts men, it's still a work in progress. But then, and at that time, Boston was under siege. The British had occupied the peninsula of Boston, and their navy controlled the harbor, and they were just resupplying the cities with provisions shipped down from Canada. This is me. These are the maps I'm drawing in my mind. I just assume you can see them. So the Patriots had them surrounded, but to break the stalemate, they needed weapons, and then they got the good news that Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold and their people had captured Fort Ticonderoga, where there were all this artillery, cannons and mortars and howitzers, 300 miles away. And Henry Knox, the bookseller, he's like 26, I think, at this point. He goes up to Washington and says, "How about I go get all them weapons?" And 300 miles away. And Washington's like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, bookstore owner." And he did it. He and his brother, Henry Knox and his brother, set off for New York in November, I think it was. And then by January, they had returned with 43 cannons, 14 mortars, and 2 howitzers, dragged across frozen rivers and over the snowy Berkshire Mountains by oxen on custom sleds. Now, this is the derivation of that old Yankee proverb that if you can sell a book, you can move 60 tons of weaponry 300 miles in winter. And then, Washington has all this artillery moved up on the hill of Dorchester Heights, and then the British wake up and see all these cannons pointing down at them, and they promptly hightail it to Canada. And that's how Henry Knox became the chief artillery officer of the Continental Army. He got the actual cannons. He actually got the artillery. And then he had trained and recruited all the other artillery officers. So everybody liked him and thought he was doing a pretty good job. And so when this French guy shows up and says, I'm your new artillery chief, there was a big flip out amongst the men and officers of the Continental Army. And so that's sort of the, that's the environment that Lafayette walked into. Luckily, the French guy had the decency to, he and his horse were crossing the Delaware River, and he drowned. The horse lived, so everything was fine. And then it's a win-win, So that's what Lafayette walked into. The thing is, the reason that the colonists, especially their leadership, the Congress and Washington and his highest ranking officers, are in this weird position with the French and all of these French noblemen, Lafayette included, is all they want to do, because they're basically, they just want what any self-respecting terrorist wants. They want to become a state-sponsored terrorist. And they're just waiting for the King of France to give them money and guns and support and his army and his navy, and that's how they won the war eventually. So they take Lafayette on because Ben Franklin sends this letter, like this, again, I'm paraphrasing, this kid is a really big deal, be nice to him, haven't finished shaking down the French government, and so they make Lafayette a major general, that's what he's called. He's basically a glorified intern until he proves himself. And then, so finally he gets his commission, and then a few days later he meets George Washington, and, Washington was, 6'4" tall, and he historically makes a big impression on Lafayette. Lafayette was so starstruck when he meets Washington. He wrote, "It was impossible to mistake for a moment his majestic figure and deportment, nor was he less distinguished by the noble affability of his manner," which is a sweet memory, but it does get on my nerves how easy it is for tall people to make a good first impression. Unfortunately, because of a scheduling mishap, we can't be at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's presentation next door. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say everybody loves Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I do love Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So anyway, he joins up, and Washington, he slowly, grows on Washington because he's just so gung-ho. Washington, the whole war, all his men are deserting in droves, and here's this kid, this French kid, who's just, the whole war is like, put me in coach. And when Washington, says, okay, you can join my military family, which was lingo of the day to basically Washington is saying, okay, you can become one of my minions, like the way Alexander Hamilton was described as a member of Washington's military family. But remember, Lafayette he was an orphan, and when Washington said family, he meant chummy minion, but what Lafayette heard was son. Then, hijinks ensue. So I guess I will take some questions if you have them. There are these microphones set up here. Yeah, let's get cracking.
Hi, I was wondering,
Hi.
When I read the book, if you'd seen the show Hamilton and what you thought about the portrayal of Lafayette.
If you didn't hear that, the question was about Hamilton. Have I seen Hamilton, and what do I think of the portrayal of Lafayette? I've seen Hamilton. I obviously love Hamilton, even though there's so much Hamilton in Hamilton. Obviously, who would love the Lafayette in Hamilton is Lafayette, who was just a publicity whore. And, the fact that he is, comes off so charming and chivalrous and is such a good dancer with such wonderful hair. Lafayette was already going bald at 19. The last time I saw it, there was an empty seat in front of me, and for some reason I just kept picturing Lafayette in it, and he was just have been swooning the whole time. It is interesting though, like one thing about that show, especially because of the casting and this wasn't your question, but I have been thinking about it lately because people have some qualms about the Founding Fathers, especially the ones who owned other people. And there are some people lately who want to disregard all of their accomplishments, and I can understand that. But one way you get past that is make Washington black, which I'm definitely doing next time. It's such a good idea. We should have done that. That should have been our original casting. Washington should have been black. Yes.
Yeah, in today's, I guess, the mass recording that goes on, everybody's lives is so archived. How do you think that will affect our look at today's events as a historian? How do you think that will change?
Everybody's lives today are so archived.
Right, just with like television, social media, everything is out there, and like very intimate thoughts are posted for everyone to see. How do you think that would affect your job as a historian looking back, or how it would change?
I mean, I guess the NSA is archiving a lot of stuff, right? I mean, my bread and butter in a lot of these books is letters, you know, like letters on paper that you have to put on white gloves to look at. I think if things are being saved, then that's good. And I mean, one thing about that will, I think, be used to future historians is that, for better or worse, people nowadays are pretty forthcoming about everything, you know? Like, sometimes it's really hard to figure out, like, what Washington was thinking. I mean, his wife burned up almost all their letters upon his death, and they're a little cagey and tactful, and they leave out private things because those are private. I guess one advantage of this world we live in, how people are documenting every omelet and aspect of their day. I'm guessing, I'm not on social media, but I hear the jokes about it. I guess that would be helpful, especially if you were some kind of social historian where your job was to figure out what people ate. All you'd have to go was like look at all these food blogs and Twitter and everything, and you could see, you know, like, oh, people eat a lot of goat cheese. I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, but I think because communication is so constant, there's maybe less of that grandeur, you know, like, if I'm, like, George Washington was painfully aware of that everything he was doing, he was basically, especially as president, that he was inventing the presidency. And so he wrote these letters with such care to, you know, he was writing to the person, but he's also writing to us, to posterity. And, you know, I don't really do that when I'm just emailing my friend Sherm. So I think, like, with the letters, because they were more formal, but also you got the best of these people, you know. And maybe we're not always at our best in our electronic communication. I'm not. Yes.
Hi, Sarah. I'm with the American Friends of Lafayette. We're 400 strong.
Oh,
and we
you people. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing our hero to the forefront. I appreciate you very much.
Oh, that's all. That's why I did it.
I know.
Just
I know.
not. I would have done it for free.
Well, we bought your book.
Uh-huh.
So Lafayette's criticized for doing things for the glory of it, not for the reason, the purest reasons. Mm-hmm. But back in the 18th century, was that such a bad thing, doing it just for the glory?
Just for the glory? No, I don't think so. I mean, if we're going to condemn all historical figures who, you know, who accomplished their accomplishments because what they wanted was glory, that wipes out everyone, maybe Mother Teresa, but she got a lot of press too, you know? I mean, if you're doing good things, I don't really care what your motives are that much. I mean, there is something about Lafayette, he's such a boy, you know, I mean, he's 19, and I mean, it is kind of bad form to abandon your pregnant teenage wife.
There's that.
So I can't overlook those things. But I mean, his glory, that was his quest for glory was part of what fueled his accomplishments. And one of the reasons he was so valuable to Washington and the American cause was that he was so gung-ho, he was so brave, he, you know, didn't care about his own personal safety. when he was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine, he was supposed to be recuperating, but he, gets up, wraps his bum leg in a blanket and rides back to the front. And I mean, he kind of reminds you of like what Lincoln said about Grant, like for Washington, like he needed him, he fought, So all of that glory whoring, it had a very, very practical outcome. It wasn't just that he wanted the glory, and he certainly loved it. And when he came back as an old man in 1824, I mean, he just loved, it was just a love fest for over a year of people talking about how much they loved him and so happy he was back. So, yeah, he wanted glory, but he, as they say in Hamilton, immigrants, they get things done. Like, he got things done, His glory was based on achievement. It was based on spilled blood and sweat and, the old college try. It wasn't like getting glory for, I don't know, what do people get glory for now? And it has to do with Twitter, I think. Not that that isn't an accomplishment, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey there. Okay, so you've written a lot about historical folk heroes and also about our American rogues, and it seems like you tend to enjoy the lives of the rogues more.
The life of the what?
The rogue.
The rogue?
Yes.
Oh, the rogue.
The one going out on their own. History's bad boys.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Or girls.
Right.
I was just wondering if you had a favorite.
Oh, if I have a favorite of anyone I've written about? I mean, rogues. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying at the beginning. I do write about the misfits. I have a soft spot for a lot of them, even the unlikable ones, maybe especially the unlikable ones, I subscribe to the Digital Washington Post, and I'm sure if all of you do, you woke up to an email from them, as you do every morning, and it said, the headline was, "Is she likable?" I'm not sure who they were talking about. But, I mean, in my opinion, likable can be kind of overrated. I mean, one of my favorite people to write about was Roger Williams, who was a Puritan theologian, likable already, right? And he comes to Boston, to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they offer him the job of being the minister in Boston, which as Puritan jobs go, that's the one you want. And he turned them down because he found them not puritanical enough. And they kicked him out of Massachusetts, basically because they just wanted him to calm down about religion. The Puritans wanted him to calm down about religion. And he's just this annoying person who is constantly haranguing them. And so they boot him out, and he, another misfit leaving home, he goes to Rhode Island and founds Rhode Island. And for a lot of non-hippy-dippy reasons, basically establishes freedom of religion in Rhode Island. Not because he thinks everyone's beliefs are valid, but because he feels like pretty much everyone except for his wife is going to hell for what they believe, and maybe that should be punishment enough. And so Rhode Island becomes this bastion of misfits, Jews, Baptists, Quakers, so like Roger Williams, he thought the Quakers had the right to live there. One time he spent 3 days debating them to the extent that I think they wanted to kill themselves. But meanwhile, back home in Massachusetts, Quakers are actually being hanged on Boston Common. So he's a very weird, unlikable, annoying person, but I found him sometimes hard to like, but very easy to love, So people can do great things, and maybe you don't want to have lunch with them.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
I love reading the books for the history, and then I love also the side jaunts you take to places like Bruce Springsteen's Boyhood Home, and what you learn, and then the correspondence and all that you delve into. And I was wondering if when you were like writing people like Lafayette and Winthrop, do you think of it? Do you know what their theme song would be? Like, do you get that in your mind when you?
What their theme song would be.
If you could give them a theme song. Or not together.
I mean,
obviously.
I don't know about that, but like generally the books have theme songs for me. Like this one, for some reason, I always wanted to put on Pete Seeger's version of O Shenandoah. You know, for some reason it's like it like adheres to the, like that passage I read, what Lafayette thinks America is going to be like. There's something in the way he sings that song, like that's the country that they were trying to build, and that's the one I would like to live in. When I was writing about the Puritans, I had 3 songs that I would always put on because they were, you know, leaving home, and they had these ideals. And one of them was the, what was it? The Mormon Tabernacle Choir's version of Bound for the Promised Land. The other was Chuck Berry's Promised Land, and Springsteen's Promised Land, because it was all what they were doing. It was all about promise in the future, and it had these kind of biblical overtones. Yeah. Yes?
Oh, hello. I love the dirt of history, especially George Washington.
The dirt? Is that what you said?
Yeah, the dirt of history. George Washington, the hero of Fort Necessity. Woo, go George. But he was overall a marginal general. His men hated him, except for his officer corps. So what influence did Lafayette have on him?
What influence did Lafayette have on Washington?
Without Lafayette, the Battle of Yorktown's a whole other story.
I mean, for one thing, Lafayette just bucked up Washington. For most of the war, Washington was about to get fired, and sometimes for cause, you know, but Lafayette was always on his side. And whenever, you know, these conspiracies arose to get rid of Washington, Lafayette was the one saying, like, these people are idiots, you're one for the ages. So there was that. I think it was just like keeping Washington going. And like Washington keeping going was kind of the key to that war. Like just his endurance, just putting up with it, sticking it out. And so I think there was that influence. Also, Lafayette was a pretty fervent abolitionist. And so he could have influenced Washington's decision to have some of his own slaves, Washington, to have some of his own slaves freed upon his death. There's thought about that. But I would say mostly it was moral support. So I don't know if you have a friend like that who, whatever, when you're down, they're the one who bucks you up. I think that's who Lafayette was for Washington. I only have time for one question, because someone else is coming in here next. You two, which one do you think has the better question? He says you have the better question. That makes me want to hear his question. But you can ask me your question after. I just have to physically remove myself from this podium. Okay. Yes?
You talked about Lafayette's coming back to America in 1824. Can you tell a little bit about the reason why almost every city in America at that time named something after Lafayette? What impact did he have on America that caused that?
Yes, and yeah. In fact, great question to end on. I made the right choice. Thank you. Yes, when Lafayette came back in 1824 and 25, that 13-month victory lap around the country where he went to all of the states, that is the origin for how all these states and, not states, but cities and counties and warships and horses and babies and streets and parks got named after Lafayette. And I think, speaking in Washington, D.C., it's worth remembering that the most meaningful of any of these, no offense to Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, is Lafayette Park across from the White House, because this is kind of our capital of protest, and this is where we the people go to yell at our presidents. And I mean, I was kidding about Lafayette being an only child, but one of the most only child things he says was, we'll forget the context because we don't have time, but Lafayette said, "I did not hesitate to be disagreeable to preserve my independence." And so I think Lafayette Park, or Lafayette Square, as it's also called, embodies that spirit. And even though we beat ourselves up in this country for how much bickering there is, how we can't get along, I think that is annoying and time-consuming, but it is also the source of our greatness. And the fact that we have this place across the street from our head of government's house, where people, as George H.W. Bush said, would like beat those damn drums while I was trying to have dinner. I think this is something that we, as a people, and you and your city should be enormously proud of. And I think the fact that it's named after Lafayette, I think that would probably be, to him, his greatest honor. And I think it is too. Good night.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.